Yeah.
Oh well. Not going
Sorry,
to do it
Anna.
again. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Sarah again, actually. Sarah is the Assistant Professor of Social Work in UCD. She's the National Social Work Representative on the HSE's Health and Social Care Professional Education and Development Advisory Group. And she's a member of the Irish Association of Social Work Special Interest Group on Ageing. And she works closely with Masters and PhD students, particularly relating to ageing, dementia, palliative care, healthcare decision making, among others. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Sarah, and I hope you enjoy it. Then afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, Annette. I will get, sorry, my screen has just gone. I will find my presentation now. Apologies.
Technology is
Yeah,
not our friend today.
if it can go wrong, it will go wrong usually.
And if people want to, up in the top right hand corner, you've got a little view button. You can go to speaker view, and that will take you to Sarah. I'm going to mute people now.
Okay, good. Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you?
Yeah, sorry, can everybody mute, please?
Oh gosh, to get out. Yeah.
Okay, Sarah, if you unmute yourself.
Apologies. Okay, I think we're good to go. Can everybody hear me okay? And Annette, maybe give me a shout if I'm close to running over time. I think I have 20 minutes, so hopefully I'll stay on track. So look, everyone, I'm so happy to be here this morning, and thanks so much to Age Action for inviting me to participate this morning. And I'm going to be presenting findings from a study that Age Action members participated in 2018-2019, along with members of the Irish Gerontological Society of Ireland, which kind of represents doctors and nurses and health and social care professionals working in Ireland with older people. And it's the results of a survey questionnaire that we carried out. And I suppose it's not a little bit contentious, but I suppose my good colleague, Dr. Now Kodadi, who works in UCD as well, asked me to get involved in this project. I was a little bit unsure, probably a bit like yourselves. I had very cautious attitudes about robots. It wasn't something I was very familiar with. But I suppose I thought, look, it's worth finding out more about this to see where people are at. And we were very lucky. We got some funding from Pfizer to carry out this research, which was actually carried out across Ireland, Japan and Finland to try and look at the differences in perceptions and attitudes towards what we call home care robots in the context of ageing in place. So I'll move on and talk about that a little bit more now. So really what I want to do is start off, and Annette's already covered a little bit of this, to look at why is aging in place so important for us? And I suppose where does the whole issue of assistive technology or home care robots sit within that? So as Annette said, we know that most older people would prefer to live in their own homes and have the support services provided to enable them to do so for as long as possible. And again, we have a very strong policy framework, both at the UN level, our National Positive Aging Strategy, and also Sláinte Care, that kind of gives those firm commitments to supporting people to age in place. But yet, I think for many of us, we know that the reality on the ground is somewhat different. I thought it was really important before we start and before I get into the home care robotics study to really acknowledge the pioneering work that Age Action and others have done around ageing in place. The big picture you can see here is the research report. It was a study on older people's ability to access home care in Ireland, carried out in 2015-2016 by the Irish Association of Social Workers, the Age Action, and the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland. And really, we've no funding to do this study, but it's probably the piece of research that I'm most proud of, because it really gave us that concrete evidence base, which we hadn't had in the Irish context, which showed that people in Ireland weren't being allowed to age in place. There was major difficulties around our home care support scheme in particular, and that people were prematurely and unnecessarily having to go into nursing home care. The second picture you can see is the lovely home care campaign that kind of stemmed from that piece of research. And, you know, I like to think that the Invest in Home Care campaign has gone some way to, I suppose, continuing to shed light in both the public and policy making sphere around the importance of home care and allowing people like yourselves to age in place. But we know there's challenges. And again, I suppose some of those issues are around, as Annette said, we're going to have increasing numbers of older people who need health and social care, including increasing numbers of people with dementia. And we do expect that assistive technologies such as home care robots will have to play a greater role in bringing about aging in place. In places like Asia and Europe, robots are gradually being adopted as a public policy solution to the workforce shortage in particular. And again, we've seen that maybe most explicitly in jurisdictions like Japan. However, and this is kind of where some of yourselves may be at, there is, you know, we know from the existing research, there's a strongly held belief that such technologies shouldn't be part of human and personal care services such as older persons care. And again, previous research has shown negative attitudes towards robots in human and care services. And again, some of the existing studies showed issues around lack of familiarity with robots, I suppose them being socially accepted, issues and concerns around violation and privacy and human dignity. And I suppose really the challenges around the development of social implementation of assistive technologies and the policies necessary to support that in terms of implementation. So as I said, previous studies did look at users' awareness and attitudes towards robots, but to date, there's been little or no research that actually looked at users in a broader context. So looking at carers and healthcare professionals, as well as older people themselves across countries and cultures. So that's really what we set out to do in this study. So the aim of the study was to examine people's awareness of and attitudes towards assistive technologies and robots in Japan, Ireland and Finland in order to facilitate the development of home care robots that meet the needs of older people living at home, their family caregivers and health and social care professionals. So what we did was we administered an online questionnaire that was mostly to the health and social care professionals, to the older people who responded. We sent out questionnaires, hard copies, and stamp addressed envelopes that people could return them in. We also provided a definition of what we meant by home care robots. And again, the questions that we used were derived from a literature review from a previous study carried out in Japan. And the data that was collected from October 2018 to February 2019. Oh, sorry. Okay, so what are home care robots? And again, this was embedded in the study design and in the questionnaire. And I think it's useful to kind of revisit this. So it can be a general expression for devices and systems that perform functions such as the monitoring of older people and their surroundings and provision of support for older people and their caregivers. And we can see some visual images here of different types of robots. And again, some of yourselves may or may not be familiar with some of the robots that have started to creep into the Irish health and social care context. You might have heard of Paro, which is like a seal type robot that makes kind of noises and vibrations and has been found to be very useful in the therapeutic capacity for people with dementia. Or you may have heard of another robot called Milo, which is being trialed in Dundalk and I suppose in some older people's homes, and it has different functionalities as well. So I suppose the whole concept of robots and robotics, I think, is slowly creeping into the Irish context. So as I said, we administered the questionnaire to people aged 65 and over, to family caregivers of people aged 65, and to health and social care professionals, both in their professional role and also exploring their role as carers. We had 178 fully completed questionnaires. And again, I really need to acknowledge the huge support we received both from Age Action and the Irish Gerontological Society, who acted as gatekeeper organisations and distributed the questionnaires to their members. This is just a brief slide showing us what we asked. So we kind of had statements that we asked people to rank or agree or disagree with. So obviously there was personal information. We gathered information about people's living arrangements, their familiarity with robots or not, their views and perceptions about the usage of robots, and also views regarding the desirable functions that robots should have if they are used to support people to age in place. So when it came to familiarity and willingness to use home care robots, we can see from the graph that 44% of the respondents had never seen a robot and 81% had never used a robot, which in some ways isn't surprising. We can also, I suppose, when we looked at the familiarity and willingness, there was a statistically significant difference between older persons, health and social care professionals, and family caregivers. However, unlike previous studies which showed that women tend to be slightly less open to assistive technologies and home care robots, there was no gender differences when we did our statistical analysis. Again, I think people's exposure to robots and other kind of contextual factors was an influencing variable. So while only 30% of the older people who responded had seen things like animation or manga, which would probably be they're kind of like cartoon things that would involve robots and would be very deeply embedded in Japanese culture. In comparison, almost 60% of both the health and social care professionals and the family caregivers had seen one. I think some other interesting findings that came up from the data were that nearly 98% of men and women at that time had mobile phones and were competent, but we found a slightly higher rate of users amongst women when it came to email and also internet use. We did find that people living in larger urban cities were a little bit more open to the use of robots than those living in rural areas, although again, the difference between the two groups wasn't statistically significant, it was more minor. Again, we didn't find any correlations between people's living arrangements in terms of older people and correlation to their openness to use home care robots. Again, our older people respondents, the vast majority of them, so 86%, answered that they would like to continue living in the community or aging in place. And only 23 old people who responded stated that they had someone to rely on if they needed help living close by. But despite this, they still didn't feel that they wanted or they were open to using home care robots. Again, we also explored with people what were the kind of items regarded as important in decision making around the use of home care robots, because again, we knew from the existing literature that people had some reservations. So some of the considerations were convenience, so ease of use, economic efficiency, safety issues. I think the social credibility piece was interesting. So participants felt like for assistive technology or home care robots to be signed off by the HSE and accredited would be kind of an endorsement. Obviously things like durability, size, but also I suppose that, you know, what came through very strongly in the data was that interdependency of our older citizens. So the opinions of people close to them was also very important, as well as kind of law and regulation of the use of devices. There was slightly different attitudes in terms of the care of family members. So we asked participants, would they like to use a home care robot at home when providing care for your family? And again, it was kind of interesting in that carers or people who are existing providing care were much more open to the use of robots than people who were non-carers. And again, I think that speaks to that familiarity piece and people who have maybe been in that caring position, understanding the usefulness and the need for assistive technology in home care robots, maybe in a way that people who don't care didn't kind of perceive to be as useful. Again, sorry, this slide is a little bit busy in terms of it looks at some of the considerations again around the use of home care robots and what was important to the participants. And again, this was the statements we asked people to either agree or disagree with. So you can see that there was quite a variation in terms of what people felt was important or not. Again, all respondents felt that it was really important that the user themselves should decide whether to use a home care robot or not, and others shouldn't decide that on their behalf. Again, people felt that health and social care professionals, this comes down to some of the data management and security issues, that they should be allowed to use photos or videos recorded by home care robots for maybe clinical care and monitoring. And also that researchers should be able to access secondary information collected for, I suppose, the purposes of knowledge generation and reviewing the usefulness of home care robots. Yeah, so the main findings from this slide was that the user should decide whether to use a home care robot. Opinions were split between whether data should be used for other purposes or not. And again, I suppose we also looked at what functionalities that people felt were most important, and to what extent human care and support should, I suppose, still be a feature of health and social care for older people. So again, all our participants felt very strongly that there should be guaranteed entitlement to still receiving human care, irrespective of the use of home care robots. And again, that kind of recognition around its capacity to increase mental and physical well-being and comfort. Oh, sorry, slide doesn't want to go forward. Yeah, and again, I suppose other functionalities that participants felt were very important were things like detecting perhaps obstacles in the floor in order to prevent falls, informing an older person of the things he or she should be doing at a scheduled time. So maybe the robot would provide reminders around medications or appointments, and also providing support for the movement or mobility that older people regularly carry out in their day-to-day functioning. So I suppose some of those more mobilize and support robots, which also exist in terms of limb function and helping people to mobilize. Yeah, so again, I suppose in terms of looking at the differences between the three countries, different emphasis was placed on practical functions. So in Ireland, things like, as I said, medication alerts was very important, while in Japan, alerting family and carers of adverse events was one of the top 3 items rated. Again, going back to kind of the functionality and what people expected, again, we can see that notifying family members was deemed important, reminders, but also some of those observation pieces I talked about, particularly for people with dementia, and also night monitoring, I suppose, for family members who don't live with the older person. This was deemed to be very important. Or indeed safety and security issues. So perhaps notifying the assistive technology or the robotics function, being able to notify a family member if somebody else has come into the older person's home. So I suppose a really wide variety of functionality what was recognised and I suppose embraced. So I suppose moving on to discussion, and sorry, this really is, I suppose, more of a taster of some of the findings. What we concluded is that the results are broadly in line with those of previous studies, although surprisingly, we found much more positive attitudes towards home care robots than previous studies did. Again, while there was generally a positive perception of the use of home care robots, respondents were less open when usage related directly to them or their family members, so a little bit more caution there. And again, there were clear differences between the groups, particularly older people and health and social care professionals. As I said earlier, people who had care duties in their private life were much more open to the use of assistive technology and robotics. And we did see cautious attitudes across all participants in the areas of decision-making and privacy. Again, as I talked about, the majority of respondents had had little or no exposure or familiarity to either animal, humanoid, or cleaning robots. So that suggests that the responses were based on attitudes rather than people's direct experience. Again, all respondents placed a huge importance and significance on the entitlement of home care, regardless of the usage of home care robots, and did recognise the potential of robots to increase both mental and physical well-being. In terms of the health and social care professionals, in comparison to the other jurisdictions we looked at, Irish health and social care professionals' attitudes appeared to be strongly influenced by their ethical positioning. So issues of autonomy and control and professional identity were very important and need to be examined further. And again, respondents were unanimous in recognising the value of home care robots in the prevention of falls and a reminder function. So our conclusion from the study was that for practitioners in the field who you often come into contact with, they need to develop a more informed and critical orientation and understanding of emerging technologies so that we can be part of the shaping of technology rather than socially determined by it. I would also argue that older people and family caregivers need to be involved in a much earlier stage in terms of the research design of home care robots, and that they should really be co-produced. Again, I think there is, and again, I think COVID-19 has really shed a spotlight on the whole issue of assistive technology. I think it probably has catapulted many of us into using technology in the way that we never did before. So I suppose maybe this is an opportune moment to revisit this discussion. For me, and again, this has come out of the findings and the other work that we're doing at the moment, is really we need more of a policy framework around the usage and utilization of home care robots. And, you know, some participants and subsequent to this have kind of talked about, wouldn't it be lovely, say, when you're applying for your home care grant, that you could also apply for internet access or for access to assistive technology or a home care robot. So while there's some work done, there's lots of work still to do in this arena. But I'm still very hopeful, and I still think that there's a huge role and a real journey ahead of us in Ireland in terms of this, I suppose, the role of home care robots and assistive technology to support aging in place. So I'd just like to thank you all very much for listening, and in particular again to thank Age Action, Pfizer and the Irish Gerontological Society of Ireland for supporting the study. And as Annette said, I'll take any questions we have at the end.
Okay, well, oh, hang on, let me get that going again. Okay, that's great. So thank you very much, Sarah. And the Sarah just published the findings from that.
Oh yes, I forgot to say that, Annette. I can share that with everyone. You can circulate it to your members because it's open access, so everybody can read the whole findings themselves in their own time.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting. Can you put my name down for one, please?
Yeah, I'll send you a copy and then you can circulate it to everyone. And then
No,
yeah.
I'm talking about a robot.
Oh, a robot. Okay. I don't even have a robot yet, but yes.
If they can perform basic household tasks, I'm in,
yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was so interesting, and I think it really is the future there. So, oops, sorry. I've just now, sorry, lost my notes there. We're just going to move on. Something that needs to be done is we all need financial support in aging in place going forward. So I'm going to ask Margaret Buckley to speak. She's a lecturer in social policy in the School of Applied Studies at University College Cork, and she teaches a diverse range of topics, which include Irish social policy, politics, education, early intervention and social research methods. So her doctoral research examined life expectancy and mortality rates in relation to changing social policy measures. And in particular, this focused on the old age pension. So that's what she's going to speak to us about today. So if you'd like to unmute yourself there, Margaret, and you can go ahead and take the screen. Thank you.
That's perfect. Thanks, Annette. So we are actually going to do a little bit of time traveling today. We're going from robots to over 100 years ago, talking about when the old age pension first came in. So there may be a little bit of temporal whiplash, which I apologize for. So to begin with, I just want to set the scene of Ireland in the 19th century. There is this kind of prevailing narrative that goes on that Ireland before and after the famine was kind of dancing at the crossroads, diddly-eyed potato, and everything was wonderful. It wasn't. Poverty was pervasive. It was everywhere. To quote Thomas Hobbes, life was nasty, brutish, and short. And I think this quote from Balch in 1850 kind of sums up what Ireland was like. Balch was a travel writer. Essentially, in the 19th century, there was a little bit of poverty tourism going on with Ireland. So smutty childhood, wrinkled age, hobbling decrepitude, gaunt distress, bloated drunkenness, shameless vice, barefaced crime. All the odiousness of ignorance, depravity, and famine were mingled in a confused mass, the most loathsome and forbidding. And of course, he's looking at this now from the outside and from the top down. What he's talking about here is extreme poverty. That's essentially what he's talking about. And poverty was, as I say, everywhere at the time. You had a situation of intense overcrowding. Tenements, we hear about tenements a lot, particularly in regards to Dublin, but they were in every city and large town. You also had a situation of increased urbanisation at this time, so people moving from the country to the urban centres. And it was, you know, we have this situation now at the moment of people, say, renting a room and sharing a house. At this stage, you didn't rent a room, you rented a part of a room. So you could be sharing a room with 10 or 12 complete strangers and everybody just sleeping on the floor. Or you could have 3 or 4 different families in multiple generations sleeping in one room. As you can imagine, the housing conditions were incredibly poor. You were talking about so you had out the country, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the bohomes of houses built out of sods of earth, but you also had in the cities houses built out of earth with tin roofs, things like that. And of course, no plumbing, no water, no sanitary conditions. Even the public sanitary conditions were appalling. Rubbish bins were not a thing on the street. That didn't come about until actually the early 20th century. So you were actually talking about disease, infestations constantly. And poverty, as I say, was huge. An agricultural labourer at this stage in the late 19th and early 20th century was earning about 10 shillings a week, and that would have been the top wage. A dock worker, for example, would have earned 4 shillings. So not a huge amount of money to be living on. And of course, massive class divide between the wealthy few, and the rest of the people. So in a situation where there was no welfare state, the welfare state did not exist at this stage, where most housing was rented and where savings were just not possible for the majority of people, once a person grew older and were no longer able to work, they quite often also became homeless. So there was very different experiences between rural versus urban in terms of aging. Older people tended to be better off in general if they were aging in a rural environment as opposed to urban. They were both very strongly linked to the idea of usefulness. So the idea of how you could contribute to the household, how you could either financially or through labour contribute to the household. So in a rural setting, an older man could continue to work around the farm, could continue to contribute that way. Older woman could help around the house, look after the children. Now in an urban setting, older women again could continue that kind of labour in the sense of looking after children, looking after the household, but older men, not so much. So in both of these settings, older people tended to live with family or friends because, again, if you grew older, you're no longer able to work, quite likely you had rented house, so you became homeless. If it wasn't an option for people to live with family or friends and they could not work for a living, the workhouse was often the option of last resort. So the reliance on the poor law system, which came in 1834 or 1838, I apologize, was essentially the workhouse system. And reliance on that system is very unsurprising in a situation where without work and savings, destitution was almost an inevitability for older people. And the greying of the workhouse population increased during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, again, as people grew older and as the economy collapsed year upon year upon year, people had nowhere else to go. So this is the population for all of Ireland by age cohort of the workhouses in 1901. So as you can see, it's fairly evenly spread up until 60, and then from 60 to 69 and above, there's the greying of the workhouse population. And since we are focusing on the old age pension, from here on, I'm going to cut out everybody under the age of 60, and we'll just look at people age 60 and above. And just out of thought you might be interested, this is the characters, or the judged characters of the aged and infirm people in the workhouses. This again challenges that narrative that only a certain type of person went to the workhouse. So over 50% of people were deemed to be respectable. And then you had, of course, addicted to drink, immoral, idle and thriftless, ill-behaved and quarrelsome, and character not known. I do enjoy this language. But as I say, it challenges that whole narrative around the use of the workhouse and the poor law system, in that over half of the people there were deemed to be respectable. So poverty in old age is not by any means a new concept. All the way back 1793, Dr. Richard Pugh actually proposed quite a comprehensive contributory pension system. He actually thought about and planned out a really comprehensive welfare system, looking after children, sick, widows, and of course older people. But the contributory pension system that he devised would be that the poor would contribute what they could, but the wealthy and the state would ensure the stabilization of funds, which is actually very interesting. But of course, that wasn't taken seriously at the time, because at this stage, what you were talking about is the prevailing social attitude was that if people found themselves in poverty, it was their own fault. Which is where Cornwall Lewis came in. So the mere fact of belonging to a certain class does not constitute a claim to relief. A widow, an orphan, a sick person, a cripple, an old man are not, as such, fit objects of public charity. Now, George Cornwall Lewis was actually an advisor to Robert Peel, who was the Prime Minister at the time. And of course, again, we're under English rule at that stage, their Prime Minister, their Prime Minister. And this was actually part of what he wrote to Peel when they were talking about setting up the workhouse system. So this was the attitude with which the workhouse system was set up. But things change. So by 1891, until society is able to offer to the industrious labourer at the end of a long and blameless life something better than the workhouse, society will not have discharged its duties to its poorer members. And that attitude came about in and around the time of a split in the Liberal Party in England, where you had new liberalism coming in, of which Herbert Henry Asquith was a member. Now, he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer and then later Prime Minister for the Liberal Party from 1908 to 1916. So while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he brought in lots of new taxation rules and budgets, and he was able to lay the foundations for a redistribution of wealth and welfare provision. Now, while he was Prime Minister then, he oversaw and campaigned for one of the very first acts of the modern welfare state, which was the old age pension. The welfare state, as we know it today, really began with the Old Age Pension Act in 1908. When he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he had managed to accumulate enough money through his taxation schemes to actually fund the old age pension scheme. So if the money wasn't there, this would never have happened. But Asquith actually thought ahead and said, we need to accumulate enough money to say, look, we have the money there, we can fund this scheme. Which resulted then in the People's Budget. So the People's Budget sought to greatly expand the burgeoning social welfare policies through a system of greater taxation and redistribution. It was described as a war budget, as in a war on poverty. But David Lloyd George, of course, stressed that the amount of money to be provided by the pension was designed not to be enough to live on, but to be enough to supplement income and to encourage saving in early life. In other words, it would be just about enough to survive on, but you're not going to be comfortable on it. So it initially allowed for a payment of 5 shillings a week and 7 shillings and sixpence for married couples. And if you remember what I said a few minutes ago, the average wage for an agricultural labourer at this stage would have been 10 shillings a week. So again, it's not actually a living wage, it's just about enough to keep body and soul together. One of the arguments of the detractors was that it would disincentivize work and savings. Again, this goes back to the whole attitude of people are in poverty because of something they did. It was their own fault. But in reality, as Leonard Courtney put it, can a butterfly even think there is going to be a winter? People at this stage didn't see themselves living to be 70, 80, possibly even 60. The average life expectancy at this stage was 49 for men and 51 for women. And that was skewed with the appalling rate of infant mortality at the time. But at the same time, a lot of people died young. People didn't live to old age. So to ensure that only the deserving aged receive a pension, there was a list of eligibility criteria which needed to be met. So the criteria were that the person had reached the age of 70, that they were a British subject, and that their annual income should not exceed £31. Now, you might ask why the age of 70 for the pension. They actually did the maths on it for age 60, 65, 70, and 75, and looked at the population of Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales, and they decided 60, there's far too many people who live to be 60, it's too expensive. 65, the same way. 75 is probably the cheapest option, but you know, people might say they're being stingy at that, so they go with 70. That's why it was purely a financial reason. So while all of these criteria don't actually appear to be outlandish, the disqualifications were prohibitive. So the initial disqualifications included being a lunatic, a pauper, a criminal, having a lack of temperance, and habitual unemployment. So essentially, when we say a pauper here, what we're talking about is a person who has approached the workhouse for either indoor or outdoor relief because they needed help. So essentially, it would appear that people most in need of the pension, people in poverty, people who are unemployed, could actually be disqualified on the basis of their need. So people who actually needed help were disqualified because they needed help. So the old age pension, with all of its faults, gave rise to new possibilities and new views of the future for older people. And being consigned to the workhouse was no longer an inevitability. And there was some great humor around this. So in T.C. Murray's one act play in Spring, which I think was 1918, there was a scene where an older man's excitement at the news of the old age pension, and it proves too much for him. But he is happy that his death will mean that that daughter-in-law who wanted to put him into the workhouse won't see one brown penny of the pension. Now, you also had age misreporting. So grateful thanks to the Sacred Heart of Jesus for obtaining my old age pension 5 years before it was due. And this was a letter written by a lady into the Irish Times, actually, to thank the state. Obviously, she wasn't thinking because she put her name and everything on it. Now, there was age misreporting. There was. Some people who look back at the Old Age Pension Act in Ireland call it fraud. I prefer to think of it as exaggeration or misreporting. I wouldn't blame the people for maybe adding a couple of years to their age. They needed the money, and it really was as simple as that. But there is quite a lot of evidence of age misreporting. So this is a comparison. Green is the 1901 census, and the blue-purple is the 1911 by age cohort. So as you can see, there are far too many people in the 70 to 80 bracket by 1911 that should be possible. But the second incarnation came around. So while the 1908 was a very positive move forward, there were a lot of issues with the 1908 Act, so the disqualifications. And this was debated for 3 years in Parliament and all over the newspapers and public debates. So the second incarnation, which started on 1st of January 1911, made it a universal payment for everybody over the age of 70 with no disqualifications. And in October 1910, the Postmaster General in Ireland issued a notice regarding the removal of the disqualification, and people who expect that their disqualification will cease were invited to put forward a claim at any time. There was also in a lot of the union workhouses, the Board of Guardians actually invited the pension officers to come in and interview all of the older people, see who was entitled to a pension and who couldn't and who wasn't, so that they could get the pension immediately when it came out. And it would appear as a result of that, that the 1908 old age pension did not actually have a significant impact on the number of outdoor relief cases or on the number of aged and infirm inmates in the workhouses. Again, that's not surprising considering, you know, if they had gone to the poor law at all, they were disqualified from the pension. But the relaxation of the disqualification clauses on the 1st of January 1911 appears to actually have had a significant impact. So again, you can see here the reduction in the number of people in the workhouse. There is a little bit of a reduction from 1908 to 1909, and then from 1911 onwards, it continues in a quite significant downward trend. Now, you also had, this is the proportion of people who were resident in workhouses who were over the age of 70 from 1861 to 1926. And again, you can see the increase happening. There was a big jump between 1891 and 1901. Very small decrease between 1901 and 1911, but by 1926, huge decrease. So you were going from 20% of the workhouse population over the age of 70 to 8%, which is a huge, huge drop. And again, this I just thought this might be fun. This is all of the people in Ireland who are aged 70 and over. This is the percentage of them that were resident in workhouses. So again, you were going from 1901, 5% down to 1926, just over 1% resident in workhouses, which is a wonderful improvement. And again, you can really see the impact of having money so you can pay rent, buy food. So the reduction in the number of people in receipt of indoor and outdoor relief was not the only effect of the old age pension on the older population. With the pension, although small, came the ability to continue to live independently and purchase necessities, so food, clothing, fuel, etc., and to be able to pay for healthcare. So older people also became much more attractive as housemates after the introduction of the pension. And there is quite a lot of oral accounts of this, that once the pension came in, all of a sudden the older relative became quite attractive actually as a housemate, because they could contribute financially to the household, and it was almost a symbiotic relationship in the sense of they were contributing financially and also possibly doing jobs around the house. And also then the family or people who they're living with are benefiting financially and also around the house, and everyone has company. But one hugely positive and unforeseen result was the increase in life expectancy at all ages. So again, this is for all of Ireland. Now, the pink is life expectancy at birth. The next one down is at age 35, and then 65, and the last one down the bottom is at age 75. So again, you can see the flexion point there. So 1901 to 1911. 1911 was the big jump. That's when it happened. And each one of the age cohorts continued to increase. And again, when we talk about the age misreporting, and sometimes the increase in life expectancy, people try to say, oh, well, you know, that's because of the age misreporting. It's not. You can actually see it here. That was the flexion point. That was the first flexion point, and it was a sustained increase that is still continuing. So again, this is at birth. So blue is for men and the white is for women. Again, you can see the flexion point. Now, this is actually interesting, just slightly, I think it's interesting anyway. Up until 1911, the life expectancy for both men and women was pretty much the same. That wasn't the case in the rest of Europe. In the rest of Europe, women tended to live a couple of years longer. There is no explanation as to why there was the same life expectancy for men and women in Ireland in particular. A few people have tried to explain it, but nothing really satisfactory. So again, you can see the big jump there. In 1911, almost immediately, men and women at birth got an extra 8 years of life expectancy. So if we then look at older people in particular, so the blue is the life expectancy at age 65, and the green is life expectancy at 75. This is a huge increase. So again, you can see there at 65 and at 75, they both age cohorts almost immediately an extra 3 or 4 years of life expectancy when the pension came in. And this again goes back to the whole idea with aging in place, that if you have financial independence and you're able to pay rent, you're able to buy food, you're able to pay for fuel, people live longer. And then just to divide it again between men and women at age 75, you have, again, you see the division beginning in 1911, and women in particular gained an additional 2 years of life in comparison to men. And again, it would have been down to financial independence. And I'm sorry, that was very quick whistle stop tour, but I am going to leave it there.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's so interesting. I love the idea of the usefulness. I don't think people appreciate the usefulness of older people now. So nothing's changed in all that time. I live in Selbridge, and we've a workhouse here. I don't know if that was the one in the picture. It looked a little bit familiar, but it's a paint factory. So they did make use of the fabulous building that it is. So I'm going to move quickly on because we're rapidly running out of time, and introduce Siobhán O'Sullivan to you. She's a lecturer in social policy in the School of Applied Social Studies at UCC, and her interests are in community-based, participatory and mixed method research with a focus on housing, education and social justice. She's currently leading 3 research projects in UCC, an impact study of Cork City Northwest regeneration for Cork City Council, and 2 Iris Research Council projects, one on housing and sustainability in West Cork Islands, and the other one with Age Action on older people's housing preferences in rural areas that she's going to introduce this morning. So it's over to you there, Siobhán.
Thank you so much, Annette. And before I start, just to let you know, I'm not going to share a screen, but I am going to put up some slides on the side. So if you'd like to change your view to speaker view, that will make sure that you can see what I put up. So on my Zoom, it's on the right-hand corner, that little view button. And if you change it to speaker view, what I put up should be clearer for you to see. Those were 2 absolutely fascinating presentations, and as Margaret said, that time travel perspective was incredible to hear about. You'll be relieved to know I'm literally going to talk for about 3 minutes, just to set the scene and introduce you to a research project, Age and Ageing in Place in rural Ireland, that I'm leading with Margaret in the School of Applied Social Studies. It's a project funded by the Irish Research Council New Foundations grant, and our school is collaborating with Age Action on it. So just to give you a little bit of background about the project, we're like with Sarah's work, we're aiming to ascertain the views of older people, and in particular we're focusing on older people living in rural places across Ireland about aging in place. And our research really, I suppose, dovetails very well with Sarah's work on aging in place as well. Now, age-friendly initiatives and sheltered housing primarily concentrate in urban areas, and policy doesn't always draw a distinction between urban and rural areas in relation to age-friendly housing. So it is far less understood how best to respond to the housing needs of rural residents who are getting older, might be living in more dispersed areas or in areas with fewer services. And our research questions focus on exploring the views and preferences of older people in rural Ireland about where they choose to live. So I'm just going to zoom in on our research questions there for you to see. And through the ascertaining the views and preferences of older people, we're really interested to find out what connects people to their homes and local areas, what would enable them to remain in their homes and local areas as they get older, and what barriers might they face in doing so. And in what ways can the work of civic, voluntary and state organisations support older people in rural areas? So I'll just talk very briefly about our research methods and what our research involves. And it's really centering on survey and focus group research. In the social sciences, we call this a mixed methods approach. And we've also been focused on a participatory approach. The survey has been co-designed with 11 members of Age Action from the GLOR and U3A group, some of whom are here today, I think. And we collaborated with them between December and March to develop the questions that are going to be asked in the survey, and subsequently in focus groups as well. And they were absolutely fantastic to work with. It was a really wonderful experience, and it's made the survey what it is. So following from this co-design process, in the next steps, Age Action is going to distribute a request to adults aged over 55 who are living in rural areas all around Ireland to take part in this survey. Links will be sent by email from Age Action after we've conducted a pilot, which should be underway in the next couple of weeks. So you should expect to receive an email from Age Action in early June, I would say. The survey is going to be available online, and we'll also provide an option for a postal survey should people prefer to fill in a hard copy. It takes about 10 minutes to complete, and the questions will focus on questions about yourself, your home, options you might consider in terms of staying in your home, what supports could help you remain in place, or what might you be interested in terms of options for moving if that occurred to you. And we're also interested in your views on your community as well. So the survey will be followed by online focus groups run by our research assistant, Dr. Elaine Desmond, over the summer. The research has received ethical clearance from our UCC Social Research Ethics Committee, and we're really looking forward to people's participation. And of course, if people have any queries, they can get in touch with me, and my email will be distributed with the link to the survey. So keeping it very short and sweet this morning. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhán. Thank you, Siobhán. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Sarah, for your wonderful input today. So I haven't had any questions put up in the chat box. So if anybody would like to jump in, we don't have a lot of time. So in a way, I have put up if you go to the chat box, you can find it on the bottom, and I've put up the link to Sarah's research there. You should be able to, hopefully that'll be right. So Kevin, will you unmute yourself, Kevin, and please go ahead with the question.
Two of the questions directed towards, sorry, get the names right, Sarah in UCD, and Siobhán Sullivan on the thing on assistive technology. I'm working with Age Friendly Ireland and the older people's councils across the country, and assistive technology has been piloted in some areas, as you probably know, Sarah, and working with the HSE and all that. And before I give the broad question, going also to Siobhán, just as it turns out, I have just completed 30 consultations across County Wexford with older people all around housing and how they're living and the effects and all that kind of stuff. And it's just been completed. What I want to know is what the connection with Age Action and both of the people have addressed is where this is fitting in to the World Health Organization 9 teams, and where they're connecting up together, because there seems to be duplication.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, and well done on the wonderful work you're doing in Wexford in terms of finding out, I suppose, what the issues are at the local level. I'm not clear on who the 9 teams in the World Health Organization are, so I'm not sure I can comment on that. Maybe Siobhán can. I suppose I do know, and I find it a little bit strange that the World Health Organization has said that Ireland is one of the leading countries to age well, and I suppose I think there's a little bit, certainly for me personally, from the work I've done, a disconnect between that statement and what's happening on the ground. I think for some of our older people, they can age very well, but I think there are significant barriers in particular areas. And as I said earlier, I think, internet access, Wi-Fi and digital literacy are huge issues, particularly for people in rural places. I can only speak from my own experience. Like my mum and dad live in Tyrone, way up in the Sperrins, and they have awful difficulty. They have no Wi-Fi access at all. So I think there's issues around that, and also the money, I suppose, going back to some of Margaret's talk about money and finances and pensions and how people pay, if you live in a rural area where you have no Wi-Fi or internet access, to enable assistive technology, where's the financial supports for people in those situations who maybe have to buy boosters and extra resources to enable them to access assistive technology or home care robots? So I haven't really answered your question, Kevin, but I suppose that's my thoughts on things, and I might see if Siobhán has anything additional to add in.
Similar, I'd love to hear more about your question there, Kevin, because I'm not 100% clear either on the WHO 19, and I'd love to connect with you on your consultation with older people. Some of our participatory group were from Wexford as well, so I think if you wanted to link in with me separate to this at some point, that would be fantastic. Like Sarah said, a lot of the issues that we found in working with people over the past few months is that there are significant barriers and different barriers even for people in aging in rural areas. Sarah already mentioned internet access. We found as well, you know, with the older people that we were working with, very significant barriers around access to services and housing that would be suitable for people as they age, and if they, you know, want to modify their houses or want to stay in their community but move, that options are very, very limited in local communities and rural areas. And you know, easier access to grants and to systems and, you know, of supports coming up as issues as well. But Kevin, do you want to clarify your point with us as well?
Sorry, you asked about the WHO, was it the World Teams? Well, I mean, if you go to age-friendly website, all those teams are up on it, and wording behind each of the teams, there's bullet points behind each of the teams. I just a bit surprised that you wouldn't have hit that button, to be honest with you.
And you know, we do, I suppose, incorporate it into our literature review in the same way that Sarah would have said, you know, at the start of her presentation on the aging in place literature. But we haven't got to the point yet, really, of writing up anything in our project. So all of that will certainly be incorporating it, and I will follow up on your point. So thank you so much, Kevin.
Because
really
housing is very much part of the Department of Health. It's not recognised, but if people haven't got proper housing, it's going to impinge on health.
Yeah.
Just can I elaborate on that, Eileen, here? It's the World Health Organization's cities, age-friendly cities and communities and towns. So you'll get it on the WHO, but we're the only country in the world that has all counties that are deemed to be age-friendly according to the World Health Organization. The housing was also done in Fingal, so they've produced a whole pile. But one of the points you did say was that if they're concentrating more into the future, they're not really concentrating on the here and now. So there is a sort of gap, and what you're doing is very helpful. But coming back to assisted technology, Sarah, again, the World Health Decade of Healthy Aging, they're using the platform of digital technology as part of their theme. So there's a baseline report from the World Health Organization that was produced last December for a strategy 2021 to 2030. So that would link in an assisted technology. And I liked your comparison between Japan and Ireland, because I accidentally get Japanese television, and it's all about robots and assisted technology, especially on a Sunday afternoon. And you can see it in homes. Now it is very expensive to buy a dog. I gather it's $3,000 or something. But I think that the platform is there at the moment, and there's a big push for it. But we need to catch up, even the research of what's linking your reports to what's happening on the ground today.
Okay, yeah, that's lovely. Thank you, Eileen. Some people were paying that much for a dog during lockdown, actually, a real dog. So Therese, I think you just put your hand up there, and then I have one more from Jim afterwards. We've only a couple of minutes left, so
I just wanted to ask, just a comment really to Sarah about the assistive technology. Like, the word assistive technology sounds much more gentler than robot.
Yeah.
And so is there work to be done about just kind of the language and education? Because I've seen in a house where there's an autistic child, I've seen this thing of reminding in the morning, getting ready for school, which could take 4 hours, but the thing comes on and says, it's now time to have your breakfast. Half an hour later, get your school bag, and it really works. So I'm sure that kind of gentle kind of thing.
No, and
I would
you've
be
raised
happy with
such
someone to remind me.
and you've raised such an important point, Teresa, about language. And as you say, assistive technology, I think we're all a bit more comfortable with, whereas robots, I think we all have a little bit of stigma. But like if we think about it, the assistive technology, like so many of us use Alexas or Google Play, and it's so embedded in our lives now. So I do think we need to kind of think about that language bit going forward. And I would agree with what Eileen said as well. And thanks for all that information, Eileen, that we really need to start bringing all these different sectors together and look at what's happening now, not just what needs to happen in the future.
That's it. I think the thing with the robots, that was a note that I made, that there's some connotation about robots and science fiction and that type of thing, and that they're not to replace people but to complement and to work alongside people. And sorry, is Jim there? He put in a question. I don't know if you want to put it yourself. I'll just read it out here. He said it's estimated that there are over 2,000 over 70s in mortgage arrears. How can we help address this issue in relation to helping them to remain in their homes, which is actually something that brings us back to the research that's being done and the whole concept of aging in place. I don't know if you're there, Jim, if you wanted to come in.
Yeah, can you hear me there?
Yeah.
Jim.
Yeah, so basically I'm involved in the Waterford Older Persons Council. I'm on the executive there, and some research during the pandemic showed that there was over 2,000 people over the age of 70 who are in mortgage arrears, and some of them serious mortgage arrears. So how can we as a society or as a group or as a forward a package to try and keep these people in their homes? The financial institutions tend to put a bit of leverage on them because of their age, which is quite discriminatory. But how can we as a society or as a group look at ways and means of supporting these people?
Will I come in there? I think, Jim,
I don't have an answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
but I will bring it to our policy meeting.
Absolutely. I was going to say, Annette, I think advocacy and lobbying will be key to that, and coordinating with other groups who are working on mortgage arrears across all age groups. And I think it's mortgage arrears is a very, very important point coming into old age. And there's just been a case recently where somebody will be paying money back to the government until she's 90, or sorry, back to a bank until she's 90. And that has set a very, very problematic precedent. So I think mortgage arrears is one very important aspect, but there's also issues over older people renting, and ties into some of the points that Margaret was making historically as well, about high cost of rent in the country, and when people are no longer earning the same money and are drawing down an old age pension, not being able to afford rent in particular areas, maybe having to go on the social housing list, and the vulnerability that can open up for older people who are renting as well, is something I think that needs to be looked at too. So I would see multiple kind of aspects around how to enable and secure people in place that needs this lobbying and advocacy really to happen, Jim. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so as I say, I will. We've just got a new senior policy executive at Age Action, and I'm making a list of things to pass over to him. So I'm going to put that on. I just see that Annie Capello,
Yes,
Lang is there. I just wondered, you were part of the group that worked with Siobhán on the research. So I just wondered, just to finish us off, if you had a couple of words to say there with regards to that.
Yeah, we worked both with Siobhán and Margaret, and then the larger team of deciding how to compile the questions for this particular questionnaire. I did fill it out just to try it myself, and I found it easy to do. It didn't take very long. It was less than 10 minutes. And I felt that because I'm in a particular situation myself, so I'm not sort of your typical, you know, I live with some friends at the moment and I'm trying to get my own place as well. So I come from a different angle, but I found that there was availability to answer, you know, to put in my needs as well, even though they weren't sort of more traditional, like they were more specific. So I was able to put that in the questionnaire. And I think, especially regarding the rural area, it would be wonderful to have the ability for people to stay within their community if they can, because of the contacts they have there, the friends, etc. And that the different options that the questionnaire allowed you to fill out, so that would help hopefully the government to resolve the problems of homes, etc. The biggest problem I think at the moment is, for example, even if you go to get a house for rent and you use the HACCP arrangement, a lot of the houses locally, and I'm in from the Boyle and Carrick-on-Shannon area, they're all huge houses with 3 or 4 bedrooms, which, you know, someone on your own, or as an elderly couple, or as a person living on their own, they don't need that amount of space. But the problem is they don't have enough buildings, you know, apartments or houses built that are smaller for that kind of need, you know. And so the bigger houses could be passed over to families, and then they could have areas where there would be apartments or smaller houses for people like ourselves as we retire, to be able to live in. And of course, the smaller house, it's easier to heat and less difficult to clean, which is also helpful, and no stairs, hopefully.
A robot.
You understand that, Annette? Exceed, yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, listen, thank you. And sorry, were you finished there?
Yes, I was, Donnelly, yeah.
So I think we're going to wrap things up now. We will be circulating the, as I say, as Siobhán said, there's going to be a small pilot run very soon, and then the survey will be put out there, and we hope that we can rely on everybody. We want to get as many people as possible to take part in that. So I'll be following that up with everybody. So I'd just like to once again thank Sarah, Margaret, Siobhán,
Wonderful,
for being our experts, and for all of you, the real experts, that came along today to join. So listen,
thank you.
You wanted to turn off your microphone.
Very good indeed.
We'll have a group clap. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so
All the
enjoy
best.
the rest of the day. I hope
Yeah.
it's fine. It looks like it's going to rain here, and don't do too much shopping in those shops that are open now. Thanks a million. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Annette. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
very good.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
very welcome. It's lovely to see everybody.